Welcome to the CastleGreen Finance webinar on CPACE. I'm Rick Kaplan from the New York Real Estate Journal and podcasts. Let me introduce you to our panel today. Our moderator is Randy Eckers from Reed Smith LLP. Randy serves as a partner for our real estate finance practice with more than 20 years of experience as a real estate finance attorney. He represents large lending institutions, private equity funds, debt funds, banks, bond investors, CPACE lenders and administrators, and property owners in a wide variety of commercial and real estate financing, structured financing, and secondary market transactions. Our speakers: Sal Tarsia from CastleGreen Finance. Sal is a managing partner of CastleGreen Finance and is a leading expert in CPACE finance. He has over 25 years of experience in commercial real estate with specific expertise in structured lending and CMBS organizations and underwriting. Next is Farhan Khatri of EE Consultants. Farhan has over 20 years of design, construction, and energy optimization experience. Farhan is registered as a professional engineer in the state of Wisconsin with numerous certifications. Next, we have FredLee from Bayview PACE. Fred served as the co-CEO of New York Energy Efficiency Corporation, the country's first local green bank. He helped launch New York CEEC as founding member, and as the administrator there, was responsible for the development, implementation, and launch of New York City's Commercial PACE program. And now I introduce you to Randy Eckers.
Thank you. So Sal, how does PACE work overall? What types of projects and assets can be financed using PACE?
Sure. So PACE is a public-private partnership that was designed to encourage investment in energy efficiency and sustainable improvements on properties. It can not only be used on existing properties for small to moderate renovations, it can also be used on gut rehabs, it can be used on ground up constructions, adaptive reuse, and it is a program that is run state by state. So each state has certain nuances to it, but the general overriding idea is to use the proceeds of PACE for energy related efficiency upgrades. In some cases, it can be used for sustainable, like seismic or flood or wind mitigation. And it can also be used for things that we naturally think of when we talk about green initiatives, like renewables such as solar or wind. And the PACE financing is unique in that we take those items and it gets converted to a real estate tax assessment on the existing property, which is a voluntary tax assessment to the owner.
Are there particular types of real estate in particular that can benefit from a PACE assessment?
It can really be used for any type of real estate that might be older or coming out of the ground. It really depends on the individual capital providers and the programs. So most of what we see are the major food groups like multifamily, office, retail, hotel, industrial. But we very often see things like agricultural uses, entertainment type of uses, or other specialty products. Hospital and healthcare is probably a good example. Senior living, things of that nature.
All right, great. Farhan, what are some of the technical requirements and parameters for a project to be eligible?
Yeah, thank you, Randy. We're so blessed to have the CPACE program here in New York, as well as nationally in all the states. As Sal was saying, it's, through the technical means, it really helps reduce the pollution rate, as well as make the environment better. It allows us to improve the condition of our buildings as well as the energy efficiency of these buildings, as well as financially enable these projects. From the technical perspective, these programs are all slightly different. As Sal was saying, they all have their own unique perspectives on how to address that. But the end goal is the same. They're all trying to make the buildings, the infrastructure, whether it's senior living or manufacturing, or hospitality, a better environment, not just from an environmental perspective, from a sustainability perspective, but also from a financial perspective as well. So the goals are all lined up regardless of where you are. In general, from the technical side is a little bit different, whether it's an existing building and you're trying to improve that, or if it's a new construction and you're trying to improve that, or if you have certain sustainability certification on that building, for example, a LEED certification or a Energy Star certified building. So the paths are slightly different, and again, it depends on what program you're in. In let's say in New York, in general, there are two sides of the energy assessment. So most of these programs require you to go in and do some level of energy assessment and balance that with the cost that is towards those energy assessments or the measures that are found. Measure is anything that can save energy or water conservation, for example. So let's pick New York. In New York, there is a clause which says a cost-benefit ratio analysis. So you have to go in, evaluate the building from the energy or water conservation perspective, and you find those independent measures. Now we have to look at the measure and evaluate the lifetime energy or water conservation associated with it, and then compare that to the cost impact of it. And if the ratio works out, then that's a great thing to do. So it's a really good check. And most of these programs nationally, they have some level of check in there that guides you to make sure that those are good improvements that we're making. So from a technical perspective, the way the path is one, you understand if it's an existing building or a new, what is the background of that building, review the drawings, go through the energy assessment. Again, if it's existing, it's done a little different. If it's new, it's done differently. And then you evaluate that project from that energy and water conservation perspective, and then line that up to the cost side. I can give you an example and pick on windows. Windows are fairly straightforward and very common in these upgrades. If you have an existing building and let's say the windows are in poor condition and we want to upgrade those windows, you want to compare the windows with what you have there right now, because you're trying to improve based on what's there right now. You're alternate. And again, it may change based on what program you're in, but that's typically how it's done in most of the programs. So you compare the new window that you have in mind, the more energy efficient window, to what's there installed right now, and you find out what the energy savings are over the life, and then you compare that to the cost, the increase of cost, what money we're spending to upgrade all of that infrastructure, and then you evaluate that. The whole objective of this technical side review is to understand that over the life of that measure, life of a measure of a window could be 20 years, 25 years, we're in net positive. So we're making a positive impact from a financial and environmental perspective compared to the amount of money that we're spending to make that upgrade. Discussion changes a little bit. If it's new construction, for new construction, of course, there's nothing there right now. So what do you compare it to? compare it to the code. And again, depending on what program you're in, it might be a little bit different, might be New York Stretch Energy Code, might be some other energy code, might be some other baseline. So these different programs allow you different baselines and different ways of making that comparison. So now your baseline is whatever that code is, and you're comparing to it. So in general, this is how the technical side of the program works.
Thanks, Farhan. Very helpful. I think that's a pretty nice segue into a good question for Fred, which is, Fred, in New York, we have Local Law 97. What is that? I think that would be helpful for everybody to know, particularly in New York City, and how can PACE help building owners comply with that?
Sure. Thanks, Randy. So Local Law 97 was passed as part of a suite of local laws in 2019 as part of the Climate Mobilization Act. There were other local laws passed with it, including PACE legislation, but that was really the centerpiece. And it's a requirement that buildings over 25,000 square feet reduce their greenhouse gas emissions more significantly over time. So the way it was modeled or designed is in 2024, that's the first measurement period. Only 20% of buildings won't be in compliance with Local Law 97. And there's basically sort of a threshold over which a building can't exceed greenhouse gas emissions, and there's different thresholds for different building types. But by 2030, that flips, and so 80% of buildings, 75 to 80% of buildings will not be in compliance. And if you're not in compliance, you have to pay a fine, and the fine is based on how much in excess over kind of that threshold you are in terms of your emissions, your CO2 emissions. So that's kind of the stick. That's part of the Climate Mobilization Act, and PACE was sort of positioned as the carrot, right? It's the opportunity to use relatively cheap long-term financing directed specifically at the measures that will help improve your building's profile vis-a-vis greenhouse gas emissions. So there's been a lot of inquiry in New York City about sort of Local Law 97 for sure among building owners. I'm sure Farhan can attest to that. And so owners are definitely focused on this in assessing kind of where their buildings stand, because they know that if not 2024, 2030, their buildings will most likely have to pay some sort of a fine. And so they need to position themselves and their buildings so that that they don't do that. And the best way to do that, of course, is to do retrofits that are sort of designed by a building engineer and auditor who does a study and can make those determinations. And so that's part of the equation in New York City for sure. Farhan talked about the cost benefit ratio or savings to investment ratio. Part of that calculation where you're determining the amount of savings or the benefit can include offset Local Law 97 fines. So that can increase the sort of, available capital to you to do improvements in your building. So there's definitely a complementary feature to the PACE program in New York City, and it's definitely aware of Local Law 97.
Great, thanks, Fred. So other than avoiding fees for their borrowers and property owners, why would senior mortgage lenders allow a PACE assessment to prime their first priority security interest? I don't know, Sal or Fred or both of you, if you want to chime in on that.
I can take a shot, and then for Sal, you can definitely jump in.
That's a question I get virtually every single day, so I figure that's probably one that we should spend a little time talking
You and me both. It's definitely, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's the hardest part of originating PACE financing, PACE loans. You need to, as Sal alluded to in sort of talking about basics of PACE, it's treated just like property taxes. So, in New York City, the Department of Finance will collect the PACE charge, so whatever that sort of debt service is on the PACE, through the property tax bill, and will also sort of, enforce in the same way that it would enforce on property taxes. And as I'm sure most of you know, if you don't pay your property taxes, the city can enforce or sort of foreclose ultimately on your building and make itself whole. And in the same way it can do that with property taxes, it can do that with PACE. And so, you have lien priority for unpaid PACE charge over a senior lender, any mortgage lender. So for that reason, all programs, CPACE programs in the country require that the mortgage lender consent to a PACE financing that a building owner wants to take on to sort of make those improvements in their buildings. So that's not always an easy conversation, right? No one wants to get prime, but you really have to sort of understand how this really works. You originate a loan, and let's say it's a 20 year, 25 year loan. In year 5, you're building owner and you don't make your PACE charge payment. So there's a lien that's attached to that unpaid portion, but sort of, the out years 6 through 2025, those do not accelerate. So those do not become due if there's a non-payment event in year 5. It's just that sort of small amount, relatively small amount that has a lien attached to it. So your exposure as a lender is relatively small. And so that's sort of, that's the dialogue you start having with your senior lender partner. You're prime, but only for a small portion. You can require that the borrower escrow PACE payments. You can make protective advances. Your rights are preserved, and you can sort of manage that. So that all being said, not every lender is going to say yes, but we've certainly had positive conversations with lenders who are willing to sort of do that. And, people in credit departments of banks who kind of begin to understand this and have now sort of embraced it. But it's certainly, it continues to be a challenge. And the last thing I'll say is, a lot of it is driven by sort of relationships. If a bank, a senior lender has a client borrower that they want to keep happy, that they'll sometimes make concessions where they might not otherwise. So that certainly will drive it. And this is all sort of talking in the retrofit context. New construction is a different conversation, but I'll stop there and let Sal sort of chime in, because I've covered a lot of ground.
Thanks, Fred. I think Fred really touched on the key word that we get from most lenders, and that's why should I agree to this? You're priming me. The term prime is typically used when another instrument is in priority in front of the lender. And I think one of the key points is that the only portion of the PACE that is in front of the lender at any particular time, because of the non-acceleration clause, is the existing payment. And it's, while PACE itself may not be familiar to every lender, how the tax lien process in an individual municipality works is generally common knowledge, either through the bank or lender's workout department, or certainly with the law firm that they're working with. And these processes can take anywhere from 2 to 5 years of notice and cure rights, redemption rights. So the lender has a very long period of time without a gun to their head, so to speak, where they can execute an orderly workout with the borrower. They can negotiate what they need to, and they can also step in and cure and make a payment, in which case the PACE lender has no choice but to sit and take on that passive role within the capital stack. So, one of the main obstacles that we really needed to get over with PACE was that lenders were unfamiliar with it. And the way that I try to explain it is that it is like a lot of other things that lenders are familiar with. Lenders have been lending with ground leases in place, particularly in places like New York City, where ground leases are very prevalent. That's something that's been around for 100 years or more. Special assessments that are issued by the local municipality if they do a public works project in the area. That's something that is very akin to PACE. And in many cases, the lenders don't even have a choice on that. With PACE, the lender always has a choice. They're required in a lot of cases to sign a consent. We go over with them what the pluses and minuses are of PACE. There are no surprises for them. And they have to sign on to a particular deal in order for PACE to get done. Now, each lender is going to have their different motivations for doing a deal with or without PACE. Among the fund-based lenders or lenders who are more of a high leverage nature, those lenders already are comfortable with high leverage in their capital stack, and introducing PACE into the stack for those lenders generally has the effect of averaging the overall cost of funds down, which is a benefit to everybody. It helps with the exit for the lender. It helps with borrower's cost. And then there's the flip side where you're going to have your low leverage, low rate lenders. And the benefit to those lenders is that we can help them in the PACE satisfy for them at least, a new market of borrowers who want that extra little bit of leverage while still keeping the overall cost of their financing down. So there is a little bit of something for everybody in there.
Thanks, Sal. It might make sense a little bit to talk about the ability to fund the capitalized interest reserve, interest-only periods. I don't know which one of you guys want to handle that, but I know in my discussions with some lenders, senior lenders, those are risk mitigants that they much appreciate.
Sure. So, we'll typically structure, our financing with a capitalized interest period during the construction period. And then there'll be, some IO period following. Typically, not every program is the same. Not every program allows an extended IO period. So it really depends. I think New York City has historically, and they've only done 2 deals there, allowed for a longer IO period. I think it's a little bit shorter for the state program, but again, it's really dependent. But I think most programs will allow at least sort of during the construction period for a capitalized interest, a period where you're basically borrowing the interest proceeds and putting it into a reserve and then paying out of that reserve, and so you're not going out of pocket post closing during that period to fund interest.
Right. So the risk to the senior lender during that period of being primed is effectively nothing, because all of the payments that would otherwise be due to the PACE lender have already been funded.
Correct.
So while we're talking about some risks and mitigants to lenders, I know some of the other questions that I've gotten are about refinance risk. So you have a lender that has agreed to allow a PACE assessment on its loan, but ultimately its loan will mature and they worry about the subsequent lender approving it. How much flexibility is there for PACE to be prepaid?
There's generally a lot of flexibility. There's no compliance around prepayment, so it's up to the individual PACE provider as to what the prepayment provisions will be. We tend to evaluate the borrower's business plan and speak with both the borrower and the existing lender that is going to be in the deal to see what's really going to work for everybody, and then we can price according to that. Some of the key features of PACE that I think are important, particularly in the current environment, are that it cannot be, there's no due on sale clause, and we can't demand payment on a refinance. So it creates kind of a, heads I win, tails I win situation for the borrower and the lender. At exit, if it's advantageous to keep the PACE in a rising interest rate environment like we have now, then it's completely up to the whoever the new owner is going to be, or in the case of a refinance, up to the borrower and the new lender, whether the PACE stays in or not. And then, of course, there's a flexibility that if rates are low and it can be refinanced lower than the existing PACE rate, then it may make sense for the whole stack to be refinanced, including the PACE. So in that way, it somewhat acts like a natural hedge against a rising interest rate environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we've certainly structured financings where the expectation is that we'll get taken out, sort of post-construction after stabilization or at stabilization. And so we'll structure our prepayment penalty accordingly, so that, once the takeout sort of period sort of comes and we know that the borrower is looking to get refinancing, that it's not a huge hit based on the prepayment penalty. But as Sal just alluded to, in this rising interest rate environment, that they have the option now to keep it in place, and maybe they'll want to keep it in place rather than refinance out of the PACE financing, because it is, again, fixed rate long-term financing. So it is a great hedge.
Great. How about inflationary pressures? How can PACE help with that?
Well, we've had a number of deals that, because of inflationary pressures and rising construction costs, it's left gaps in the capital stack. So we've been able to add on or do a second assessment to our PACE in some cases where the project changed in the middle. We've also been asked to step into deals where PACE originally wasn't used to be able to add an assessment to an existing project that is already in construction and solve that gap that might have come up during the construction process. That's happened quite a bit over the last couple of years. The kind of 1-2 punch of COVID followed by inflation has left a lot of projects that, A, got delayed using up the interest reserves that might have been put in place, and then B, the rising construction costs that created a second gap. And we've actually had lenders who have called us up and said, hey, we weren't necessarily open to this a couple of years ago, but we think that this is something that a problem that you can help us solve.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo just, yes, and this is a sort of also responsive to your question about why would a lender consent to this. We've talked to lenders who've asked us to step in where they have, a borrower who is, doing work kind of midstream, and their cost overruns. And this is the one that I'm thinking about in particular, was a retail asset that was sort of doing work and trying to get to stabilization, but in the meantime we're really cash constrained, and we're struggling to make payments on their senior loans. They were asking for they had done some work that was eligible sort of retroactively, which is also a component of PACE, where work has already been done, but you can actually finance it as long as sort of with PACE PACE proceeds or refinance if it qualifies sort of retroactively. And then sort of this project, there'd been work done, there was work kind of ongoing, and then future work planned. So it didn't work out in terms of actually getting a deal done, but it was the lender that came to us asking up for us to provide some PACE financing to help them get to sort of that through that period of stable sort of getting to stabilization.
Great. So speaking of other problems that PACE could solve, how about touching upon how PACE could solve at least partially the problem of rising costs of interest rate cap agreements?
So a lot of the first mortgages that are done on either ground up or heavy construction projects are floating rate in nature. So, again, the borrowers are getting hit multiple times They're getting hit by the short end of the curve, rising as the Fed continues to raise rates. They're also being hit very hard purchasing interest rate caps that, because of the current environment, the interest rate caps are very costly up front. So the way that PACE mitigates that is if we're stepping into a stack with our long-term fixed rate financing, we can often absorb anywhere from a quarter to 1/3 of the capital stack that the bridge lender may have otherwise been providing. And we're replacing that floating rate debt with long-term fixed rate debt with no cap requirements or anything else that adds cost to the borrower.
Great, thank you. Let's see, so Fred, where do you see the New York programs and other programs heading?
So yeah, I mean, anyone familiar with New York City? So just a little bit more on my background. I was with the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. Randy definitely mentioned that, but my role was, a lot of it was to sort of set up the New York City program and get it launched. And this was last year in May, and so did that. So very familiar kind of with the program, and also kind of some of the the evolution of the program, and Sal's right there too, because he's in New York and is trying to do business in New York. And the short answer is new construction was sort of came after the original legislation. It was an amendment, so there was a delay in sort of getting that in place. So legally, there's an ability to do that. What doesn't exist yet are the guidelines around new construction. So the city is in process now of it's a rulemaking process that has to go through to get those guidelines finalized. So our hope and expectation is that by the end of this year, those guidelines will be in place, and we'll be able to do new construction or use PACE for new construction financings in New York City. Currently, they are evaluating retrofit projects, so that is active, but yeah, it's just a matter of time. It's going through its growing pains. It's still a relatively young program, and we see this with a lot of different programs where it does take some adjustments to get to kind of a working, stable program. And so we have really high expectations for New York City. It's an important, like I said, from City Hall's perspective, it was an important element of the Climate Mobilization Act. It's meant to really support Local Law 97. So we don't see it going anywhere and not being a highly functional program that supports kind of the goals of the mayor's office. I'll also add just one thing. Local Law 97 is important, but Local Law 154 was also passed in December, which is a requirement that buildings, newly constructed buildings, all newly constructed buildings after 2027 have to be fully electrified. So no combustion of fossil fuels under most circumstances. And so, I don't think that was necessarily part of the equation. When PACE was conceptualized in Local Law 97, but we would love to see a program that's very supportive of sort of getting that work done too. So really working to help get to a point where that program allows both for sort of retrofits that are that enable buildings to meet the Local Law 97 requirements, but also buildings and owners being able to meet Local Law 154 effectively using PACE financing, because it's all the same sort of ultimate goal of getting to reducing the carbon footprint of New York City, and we should all be sort of focused on that, because that's really kind of the point of the legislation and of PACE itself.
Great. And so just I know this is supposed to be a New York focused panel, but maybe it could be helpful just to mention how many states there are nationwide that have these programs that are active.
I believe it's around 37. It might be more than that now. That's the number that sticks in my head. Right around 37. And more coming online sort of every day. Tennessee just passed legislation allowing for PACE within that state. So we see that as sort of a really high potential market. And Washington and other states definitely there too. So it's like I said, it's a relatively young financing tool, particularly in New York. More mature in some other jurisdictions. It's been around in California for a while now, almost a decade. There are other programs that have been very active, but we do anticipate that New York will get there sooner rather than later.
Great. Another question that I know I get all the time, and I'm sure you guys get it as well. When people think about government programs, they think that it will take 6, 8, 9 months to go from start to finish on, starting a PACE application process to actually closing on the PACE financing. I don't know, Farhan, if you want to talk about maybe sort of the energy report. I know you touched on it earlier, and then Sal, Fred, if you want to talk about just the overall process and how it's much quicker and more efficient than people fear.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Yeah, we get involved in different stages of the design or construction of that project. The amazing thing about CPACE is you can leverage that at pretty much any phase of your journey of that project. In the very early schematic phase, our engagement in those projects is something like the owner wants to improve the building, but they don't quite know how to improve it. So we can help them, or their engineering consultant can help them understand what the energy benefits would be, work with their contractors, or do an estimating to figure out what the cost side would be. Again, balance the two, and then show them that what the benefit would be of different options that are available for that improvement. And then, of course, most of the programs allow that level of analysis. It has to be a very detailed analysis to take that, and then the lenders approve it. And then, of course, it goes through the whole PACE process. On the other side of the spectrum, there's a lot of, most of the programs have a retroactive clause in them too. So even though you might be done with your building construction, let's say last year, it's occupied, you can go back and you can take energy credits and then apply PACE lending on that project as well. So in those cases, everything is known about that building. Unfortunately, you can't really change or optimize it anymore because it's fully built and all the systems are installed. You won't go in and try to replace windows in a 1-year-old building. So what you do is you do a survey to figure out exactly what's there. The construction documents or the permit documents are fully laid out. So it's a little different analysis in that case. So again, kind of goes back to the flexibility of what CPACE programs allow you to do, whether you're in the very early phase. Now you can leverage this to, again, make your design better. Whether you want to go towards electrification or you want to add more sustainability or renewable design to it, or just upgrade your equipment. We get involved in a lot of projects where the clients are looking at certain products, whether it's heat pumps or PTACs or boilers or chillers or different type of windows or amount of insulation in the wall. And, we can provide them the feedback that, hey, if you can upgrade this, this will be the impact on the energy savings lifetime, as well as your base loan amount. And 99.9%, the clients go towards upgrading because the cost of upgrade at that stage is fairly low. Whether you go for a standard efficiency equipment or a more high performance per se, and then leverage not just the energy savings, the sustainability side, but also leverage the PACE program. So does that answer the question, Randy?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I don't know, Sal or Fred, if you want to talk about how you work hand in hand with the engineer, with the property owner, in sort of guiding them through the entire process. I mean, you know, not everybody's entirely familiar with the process, the timeframes, what qualifies, what doesn't qualify. So it could be a little bit of a daunting task for a borrower that wants to use PACE, maybe needs to use PACE, but doesn't really know how to do it. So I don't know, Sal or Fred, if you want to talk about how you sort of hold the borrower's hands or property owner's hands and go through that entire process.
I can jump in on that. You know, I think the perception that it is daunting, you know, is certainly out there. So, you know, let me kind of dismiss that. Unlike a lot of government programs that offer government guarantees or some form of actual government money or taxpayer money, the PACE program, the role of the government is really only to provide us the path with which to record our instrument. So most of the work on behalf of the government has been done upfront once they have already passed the law, the individual municipalities have opted in. And from that point forward, it becomes a much easier process. Most of the daunting part of the work is actually done by Farhan. You know, Farhan, you know, when I first met him, Farhan had shoulder length hair, and, you know, he's since pulled a lot of that out. But, you know, all joking aside, you know, most of the work that the borrowers would be concerned about, how do I qualify for this? Who do I speak to? How do I deal with the government? It's, you know, the energy side and how you qualify is largely done by Farhan or groups like his, and most of the rest of the work is done by us. So to the borrower's side, it's going to look like a very simple construction loan process. We don't have all of the same requirements that the primary lender is going to have. In a lot of cases, we can piggyback off of their third-party reports, like the appraisal, phase one, and a lot of their due diligence. So we're not duplicating efforts, duplicating costs. And I really have not found too many cases where the lender that we're working with on a project has been prepared to close before we've been prepared to close. We can generally get there in 45 to 60 days in most cases. You know, if there are any delays, it's often because you know, a normal regular issue came up on the loan that needs to be worked out through a combination of our due diligence and the lender's due diligence.
Yeah, I'll just say that the hard part with PACE financing happens before the term sheet is signed, and then afterwards, it's, as Sal said, I think it's a pretty seamless process. And if you have an experienced partner like Farhan, who understands PACE and understands some of these programs, then you can get through that process pretty quickly and painlessly. And even if there is pain, you're not the one who's experiencing it. It's either the lender or the engineering firm that's going to bear the brunt of that. So it's not daunting. It shouldn't be a daunting process, and it shouldn't be perceived as a daunting process.
Great. Thank you, guys. Let's see. So I'm seeing a bunch of questions pop up here. Let's see. I don't know, Rick, if you want to chime in with any of these, or I'm happy.
We can start with the questions that people have submitted. The first question I have is from Robert Simon. Does a loan servicing company have authority to agree to a PACE loan placement on behalf of the holder of the senior loan?
I'm happy to answer that. So I think the answer is, in short, it depends. So it depends on what the servicer's rights are pursuant to their servicing agreement that they have with the holder of the senior loan. But given that historically PACE loans are specifically prohibited in many traditional loan documents, that will be something that generally the lender itself or the holder of the loan would have to approve. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that, but that's been my experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's no specific requirements on the PACE side. We just need to have a signed consent from whoever the authorized party is, which, as Randy said, is going to depend on the agreement between servicer and lender.
Okay. Any other answers to that? I guess not.
No.
Let's move on. This is from Julia Ann Slom. If the lender steps in, however, they would be required going forward to make all of the payments correct in order to protect their position.
Yeah, I mean, these are typically annual payments. So if there's some sort of a workout situation where it extends for, multiple periods, then theoretically, yes, but hopefully, it's not going to take that much time to sort of work out sort of a solution to an issue that a lender's having on the senior side with the financing. And in the meantime, it's 1 year of payments or 2 years of payments over, kind of a 25 to 30 year term. So again, it's not nothing, but it's manageable from a lender's perspective, typically.
Right. One other thing to keep in mind with respect to that, I mean, I completely agree with Fred. One of the other things to remember here, which I'm not sure we actually touched upon, is that the term of a PACE loan is fairly long. It's about, let's call it 25 years. So, the principal and interest payments are amortized over, or the principal payments are amortized over a fairly long period of time. So that does help bring the annual payments down in general.
I think it's also important to clarify that other than a missed payment, there are virtually no other defaults within PACE. We don't have technical defaults. We don't have a lot of other rights. Even in the case of a missed payment, we're generally not the ones enforcing. It's generally the taxing authority. So, for anybody that's done workouts, I did a lot of workout work after the credit crisis. Typically page 1 of the lender workout book is let's make sure that the taxes are paid. They're very adept at doing it. Again, to reiterate what I said before, these tax lien processes are generally 2 to 5 years. So the lender isn't under any undue pressure that they may be under in other types of structures. If there's a missed payment on a ground lease, for instance, that fee owner who's making the ground lease has an abundance of rights, can step in relatively quickly and put a lot of pressure on the entire capital stack. And I know it's also somewhat of a universal fallacy that if I have a mezz lender or a subordinate lender in the capital stack, that they're behind me, so they can't really harm me in any way. Anybody who has actually done a workout knows that person who is in the first loss position, they're interested in protecting their loss. And they're often going to put pressure to push out the borrower that you originally wanted to do the deal with. They're going to waive that intercreditor agreement in front of everybody and stretch out the deal as long as they can to see that they can be made whole, which is going to add legal costs, interest carry, and abundance of other things that are just going to make the overall exit more and more difficult. By contrast, PACE is very passive in the stack. The interest rate that we accrue gets accrued at a much lower rate than the subordinate lender would typically be. And, again, we're, not in a position where we can put a lot of pressure on the capital stack, which gives everybody the ability to, execute something that's going to work and hopefully achieve the best possible exit.
Okay, well, Julia Ann has extended that question to as long as the property can support the debt. I just meant that the lender needs to be fully confident in the property's ability to support the payments. Well,
That's correct.
Yeah, I think she was answering her question. Let's move on to Brett Eagleson. Generally speaking, how do lenders qualify the C-PACE funds? Do they treat it as additional leverage?
That's a very individual question. We deal with a variety of lenders all the time, and they all approach PACE very differently. Brett can certainly, follow up with an additional question if this doesn't answer it for him. But I think the primary point of PACE is that it's a flat, even payment over a very long term that is very predictable. So however the lender chooses to underwrite it, it is something that is predictable within their underwriting. There is nothing that's going to change over the life of that PACE, and is generally a lot easier than them dealing with other participants in the capital stack that may not be as predictable.
Yeah, I would just add that I think that's right. I think it is definitely an individual sort of approach based on the lender, but there are certain segments of lenders that are more sort of open to PACE and may not actually see it as additional leverage. And Sal, maybe you can talk to this a little bit. I know USDA lenders typically look at PACE a little bit differently, or maybe not as punitively as others. And treat it more as like an expense versus additional leverage.
That's right. Technically, PACE is not a loan. It's not debt. It's processed as a real estate tax, and from the point of closing forward, it must act like a real estate tax in every way, shape, or form. So while there certainly are lenders out there that will view and treat it as additional leverage, there are other lenders that take more of a cash flow approach and look at it from the standpoint of as long as I know that the cash flow is supported and I'm otherwise meeting my criteria, and in some cases the lenders will even move their underwriting criteria a bit to accommodate PACE because of our lack of rights and the fact that they know that they're still very much in a control position in the capital stack. But every lender will have their different views on how to treat it, how to look at it, and its relative risks or lack thereof.
Okay, well, Brett has an additional question to add to that. How do they do the analysis on the debt? Do they calculate debt coverage ratios on an amortizing basis?
I think, again, that's going to depend on the lender's exit analysis. But again, what we do on the PACE is we generate long-term fixed rate self-amortizing schedule. That schedule gets attached to the documents which the lender is privy to, and then they can utilize that information and that number to either adjust their debt service coverage or account for it from their individual risk profiles within their credit process.
Right, and to an earlier point, sometimes there is an interest-only period or a capitalized interest period on the front end. So, that's all sort of baked, right, and understood sort of at closing. And so that's going to be a schedule that everyone is understands and comfortable with, and the lender will be privy to that, and they'll act accordingly based on sort of what the payments are going to be.
Okay. Well, we have a little more time, so I'm going to throw out a couple other questions for you, which is, how does CPACE compare to other subordinate debt?
We're a lot cheaper.
Right, and I think Sal hit upon a really important point about not having intercreditor, not having really any rights in a workout scenario. I know a way that a lot of folks think about PACE is as a mezzanine loan replacement at a much lower rate, but happens to be in a more secure position in the capital stack.
Okay. What if my lender doesn't approve CPACE?
That's their prerogative, and then the borrower's prerogative is that they can either seek out another lender or proceed without the PACE. We very often try to work with the borrowers to make sure that their lender, if they are adversely conditioned on PACE, to make sure that they have a clear understanding, to see if there's anything that we can structure within the PACE guidelines that would make the lender more comfortable. In some cases, we have worked with banks who were, got on the phone with me. They said, I'm negatively predisposed to PACE. I really don't think that I'm going to want to do this, but I'll try and keep an open mind. Please explain to me why I would. And, it's amazing how quickly a bank's perspective changes when you tell them, well, we can fund the PACE and we can use you as the escrow agent. I still have yet in my career to meet a bank that doesn't like escrows. So, aside from them getting to hold those escrows, they have the visibility of knowing that the funds are there, how they're being released, and, gives a general sense of control. But, in the absence of that, we can help borrowers try to find another lender, or, if the borrower decides that they need to get their deal done and proceed without us, that's, unfortunate for us, but that's, also their prerogative.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I'm sure it's true for Sal. We spend a lot of time educating senior lenders about PACE. And I do think as PACE proliferates and it becomes more of a factor and more in demand, and, hopefully New York City, New York State will drive some of that. Lenders are going to have to pay attention. They're going to have to sort of, answer to borrowers. And we'll see that maybe some of their competitors are getting comfortable with PACE and providing them with a competitive advantage in terms of originations. And so I do think that, it's going to get to a point where it's a more of a known sort of quantity and better understood. And once I think lenders do fully understand PACE, it's, sort of their first blush sort of reaction gets cast aside, and then they understand that the exposure is a lot smaller. And it can be very beneficial to a capital stack to have PACE in place. And so that's an ongoing conversation, and I think it's kind of happening as we speak. But my feeling is that more lenders are becoming more comfortable with PACE even as we speak, and I think that's just going to evolve over time and improve over time.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fred, completely. I've spent a lot of time in the last few years talking to lenders about approving it, what the risks are, what the mitigants are, and without a doubt, more and more lenders are becoming more comfortable with it.
Well, unfortunately, we are coming to the end, and I want to thank everyone. I know we do. Before we do have one other question that just came in. I just want to throw that out, and then we can close this out. How does PACE determine max loan amounts? Is it by DSCR or debt yield? And can you give me a few examples of well-known lenders who allowed PACE?
So let me attack the first part of that question. The way that we size deals and the constraints on it are, fit into three categories. The first and generally most important is what is the eligibility of the project? So we're not really evaluating that on a debt service coverage or a debt yield. Those are more important parameters for the senior lender. For us on the PACE side, we're dissecting the budget, whether it be renovation or new construction. We're pulling out all of the PACE eligible components of that. So that's going to be your HVAC systems, your lighting, your electricity, a lot of the building envelope that contributes to insulating the inside of the building, and some of the water conservation measures, or in the cases of places most prevalent like California and Florida, we can include seismic in California, we can include wind mitigation in places like Florida. We add up all of those items, we can include a portion of the soft costs that help enable the project to happen. And then, as we've discussed before, we layer in also the interest carry in the form of capitalized interest, as well as the closing costs. That's how we size our PACE. And then the further constraints on that, certain jurisdictions might have LTV constraints that are compliance issues. And then the third parameter is going to be that discussion with the first mortgage lender. We might see a project where we say, well, we can quote you $25 million of PACE. And, there is a lot of mid-grounds with the first mortgage lender. We've talked about the first mortgage lenders very much in black and white, but we've had a lot of situations where the first mortgage lenders have said, you know what, I'm not comfortable with what you've quoted, but I would agree to a capital stack that had, say $20 million of PACE instead of 25. So those are going to be your three constraints that are really going to dictate what the sizing looks like.
And I agree with everything Sal said. I think it's a comprehensive answer. In terms of lenders who've approved it, I wouldn't necessarily name any individual lenders. I do think it is sort of project and deal specific for a lot of lenders. But there is a website, Pace Nation, that has a list. I believe it's still on their website of I think it's like 300 and counting lenders who have consented to PACE financing on a project where they're a senior lender. So I would just suggest going to that list if you're curious about who has consented to PACE in the past.
Or you can just contact them at CastleGreen Finance, and they'll be able to give you all the answers.
I'm at Bayview, so if you're looking for me, go to Bayview.
Well, I want to thank you all for speaking today. I want to thank Randy Eckers, Reed Smith LLP, for moderating today. Sal Tarsia from CastleGreen Finance LLC for speaking. Farhan Khatri of EE Coast Consultants, and FredLee at Bayview PACE. And I want to thank everyone for attending today and watching your emails for the CastleGreen Finance white paper, and a thank you with the link to the recording of this event that we just put on this morning. And I want to, if anyone wants to get a hold of anyone that was speaking today, at the end of the recorded video, which you can find at one of the links that you'll get in your email, you'll be able to get all the contact information for each of the speakers as well. I want to thank you all. I want to wish everyone a great day. Thank you.